And we're good. Okay. So again, we are back for the second session of the day. Here we are talking with Matias Crisostomo and Richard Singhroy about more ecosystem services, if we can say it like that. So first, we will talk with Matias about socioeconomic impacts of climate change on the oceans, the policies, the tools, but also the perception of the Maldivian population. Matias, so you were at Monaco, but once again, working on the Maldives. And now, Matias, you are in Chile.
Yes.
So what time is it there?
It's 9:45 almost in the morning.
Okay. And Richard then will talk about intertidal gleaning and seascape configuration in the Indo-Pacific, another place of the world. So Matias, you can share your screen, please, because as you're with the distance, you can take control. We can see it, yes. And it's okay also on the live. So your family, friends, and supervisor can also see you. Do you have a countdown for the 50 minutes in front of you?
Yeah.
Okay. So just a second, I just need to do no, nothing, it's fine. You can go 15 minutes from now.
Okay. Good day. So I'm Matias Crisostomo, and I'm going to present my master thesis, which is about the socioeconomic impacts of climate change in the ocean, the plans, policies, and tools to mitigate the impacts, and the social perception of Maldivian local population. This master thesis was developed with Nathalie Hilmi in the Scientific Center of Monaco. So we're going to talk a little bit about our objectives, the introduction and the background, our case study of the Maldives, the methodology, results discussion, and our conclusion. So the main objectives of this master thesis is to assess the socioeconomic impacts and the consequences of climate change in the ocean, the policies, plans, and tools to mitigate them. And in the other side is to evaluate the perception of local Maldivian population regarding the same topic, which is the socioeconomic impacts of climate change in the ocean and the policies to mitigate them. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of the ocean. And first of all, I would like to start with defining as is ecosystem services, because the ocean is one of the, actually, it is the biggest ecosystem service provider to humans. So we're going to find, he's going to provide us bioprospecting, food security, livelihoods, recreation, coastal protection, carbon sequestration, which is extremely important, and habitat. Not all the ecosystem services are mentioned now, but it's just to have an idea. In the other side, if we go to the global economy, the ocean will provide, it provides actually currently around 230 million of jobs and contributes to the economy in $1.5 trillion. The assets are estimated in 24 trillions, but as we know, ecosystem services are not really exact in the measurement, so it's incalculable. Due to these two topics mentioned before, the economy and the ecosystem services, the ocean is a society cornerstone. And as we can see here in the allegory of the iceberg, we just see on the top the millions of jobs that provide us, but in the part that we cannot see in the iceberg, we can see food security, bioprospecting, cultural aspects, inspiration, identity, among others. At the same time, just talking a little bit about SDGs, we can assess that the SDG number 14, which is life below water, it's going to help in the achievement of all the other SDGs. So it's a fundamental and plays a crucial role in the achievement of these sustainable development goals. Some of the consequences and socioeconomic impacts of climate change in the ocean are sea level rise, impacts in corals, the lack of oxygen for some species, seafood security, the pollution and greenhouse gases, and harmful algae bloom. Just some of them to mention, and we have to be aware that this is a cycle. So probably one of these impacts is going to impact the other one, so it's going to impact the other one, and so on. So it's like it's a kind of negative wheel. For protect the ocean, currently we have different strategies, and some of them is policies and policy instruments. Here we just mentioned 3 of them, which is the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, which is UNFCCC, and the Paris Agreement. We have to say that these 3 are on different times. UNCLOS was the first one in 1982, and 168 parties were submitted to this treaty. To MCCC was 197, and to Paris Agreement was 190 parties that are submitted in this treatment. What is important here, that UNCLOS and UNFCCC promote the preservation and conservation of marine resources and the marine habitats, and also talk about the climate change, but they included in the part that says that one state cannot harm other state. So climate change goes into that definition. However, in the Paris Agreement, they talk about should take, like the states should take protective measures from sinks or greenhouse gases. So this should make the regulation something not mandatory. So this is why decision makers are playing an important role to develop and to enhance these policy instruments. In the other side, we have management and financial instruments. And for example, one example of financial instrument is the carbon offsettings, which is basically one country generates CO2 or greenhouse gases, and then they buy in carbon market, which is, for example, I start to protect mangroves, seagrasses, I build some renewable energies to decrease and mitigate my impacts. So I create a kind of, I generate a balance between what I'm doing and what I'm mitigating. Also, a management instrument, as we know, it's marine protected areas, but and the goal is for 2030 to protect the 30% of the ocean, but currently it's less than 10. So we have to improve on that as well. Let's go to our case study, the Maldives. So the Maldives is located in the Indian Ocean, close to Sri Lanka and India. Why we choose the Maldives? Because the Maldives contains 1,200 small coral islands grouped in clusters, and in around 200 are habited by local. It's the 6th smallest country in terms of land, and is the 7th largest reef ecosystem in the world, containing the 13% of all the reef all the reef globally. At the same time, harbor around 285 species of algae, 400 species of mollusks, 80 species of echinoderm, among others. And it's important as well because it's extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Actually, in the index created for the University of Notre Dame, which includes 181 countries, Maldives, it's located in the 113th position. At the same time, we spoke about sea level rise, and here is extremely important because the maximum, the highest natural elevation from this country is 2.4 meters. And the average of elevation above the sea level, of course, is 1.8 meters. Some of the climate change impacts that we're gonna find here in Maldives is floods, coral reef impacts, sea level rise that are gonna impact the livelihoods, and at the same time, heat waves. Why is important coral reef here? As we mentioned before, because Maldivian economy, more than 50% relies on the ocean. So it's tourism mainly and fisheries, which are directly linked with coral reef impacts. Here we can see a table that it's proposed by the government with some of the climate change impacts and soft and hard measures. So for example, against sea level rise, a soft measure could be like the mangrove afforestation and the beach nourishment, and a hard measure, it's the construction of seawalls and tetrapods. Actually, they are building now a city out of the island to protect. Here we can see like nice picture from Maldives that all of us can like check in internet, but what happens with the human drivers to climate change and with the B side? As we can see here, Maldives, it's a country that it's extremely touristic. So daily, one tourist produce around 3.5 kilos of rubbish. And we have here the SAP, which is the Strategic Action Plan from 2019 to 2023 from the government, that they are trying to implement waste management plans. But what happened that now this year, a new initiative from the government was like to remove the garbage, put it in vessels and boats, and throw it in the ocean. So it's kind of contradictory, the policies that they are like, and the initiatives that they are trying to implement against how they are doing it. So let's go to our study, which is to assess the social perception about the impacts of climate change in the ocean and the policies. And our methodology was a questionnaire in which was containing categorical variables, including multiple options and short answer. We use a convenience sampling technique due to the availability. It was collected between the 1st of March and the 31st of April this year through web platforms and social media. And the data analysis that we did was on RStudio software, and we use a chi-square test due to the categorical variables, the Kramer V to measure the association measure, and some Spearman rank correlation. We have to understand as well that the Maldivian population, it's around 540,000 persons. So to reach a confidence level of 95% with a 5% of sampling error, it was needed a sample size of 400. We couldn't reach that sample size due to some limitations that I'm going to explain after. So we could reach 59. So that gave us, under the algorithm and the table, 14% of error, which is like quite a lot. So which one is the aim of this survey? It's compare 4 parameters to characterize the sample, which is the age divided in decades, the gender, the occupation divided between educational field, ocean-related field, and non-ocean-related field, and the geographical location, like the island or atoll, and their relationship with the perception of the impacts of climate change in the ocean, the policies, plans, and tools to mitigate them. Our results and discussion. So we find out that the 57.6% of the sample was female, and this is can be corroborated with the literature, because they explain that females are more interested in environmental topics than male. At the same time, we have that the majority of the sample, the individuals from the sample, comes from Kafu, which is the 35.6%, and after followed by Male, which is the capital. The major group of the sample was located between the 31 and 40 years old, which was representing a 52.5%. As we can see in the figure 8, we have a really like similar occupation between educational field, ocean-related and non-related, being educational the biggest one, but just for a little bit. However, the 96.6% of the individuals felt the impacts of climate change in their daily life. And this is corroborated as well by another study that Stoyanov did a few years ago, which represents what they feel and perceive around 60% of the impacts. At the same time, 62.7% feel responsible about the climate change, and 37.7% feels as a victim of climate change. Despite the high amount of victims, like perception of victim that we have here, 94.9% of the samples are committed to change their habits to helping the climate change mitigation. The increase in temperature from the ocean and the atmosphere, death of corals were the most perceived impacts from the individuals on the sample. But also it's important to mention that health problems was mentioned, and as you can see in the figure 10, like a word cloud, the biggest text, it's more repeated actually, so it's health problems, and that was one of the others impacts that they perceive in their daily life. At the same time, in the policies that they know, the most repeated policy was banning plastic and sustainable waste management. But this is really interesting to watch in the figure 12, that 45.8% of the individuals are thinks that the effectiveness of the current policies, it's null, or it's not good actually. and 62.7% of the sample thinks that it's important to create new policies to mitigate the climate change impacts. And at the same time, some of the policies that they propose is increase public transport, renewable energy use, increase awareness in the communities, and involvement from the general public. So this provides us a little bit of data that the community is not really involved in the creation of these policies. What do we find? We find that the age have a significant relationship with the daily impacts, which is like, yeah, I feel like climate change is impacting me, and with the willingness to change having a strong link. And at the same time, we found out that gender relies in the occupation. I mean, can be interpreted that relies on the occupation, and has a significant relationship as well with how individuals perceive the impacts. At the same time, occupation has a significant difference with the geolocation, so we can interpret that these two variables rely in each other, and the same happens with the already mentioned before. The limitation from the study was, of course, COVID-19, the language, because Maldivians speak Daibehi, the geography, because as I explained before, it's 1,200 island, but 200 are with inhabitants. So if we want to have a representative sample, it's kind of hard to do it. And the application that was online, and most of the Maldivian population don't have access to internet. So the recommendations to improve our study is to increase the sampling effort, develop a study with the governmental entities, NGOs, local stakeholders to improve the sample size, decrease the sampling error and the language gap, and implement the study in a face-to-face manner to so as well as was explained before, due to the lack of internet access, and apply for funds and economic support due to the high mobility of the study regarding the geography of the country. Our conclusions is it's imperative to develop better approaches in research and in the legal framework and in the implementation in the different scales of the policies in the country, and the manner in how decision and policymakers are working is it's crucial for human development and to address the SDGs as well proposed for United Nations. The common and coordinated efforts from the government and these stakeholders are needed to enhance and improve the conservation and preservation of nature. Consequently, the human well-being and livelihoods, health, food security, among others. Fostering the community's inclusion can have a positive impact in changing the strategies, policies, perception of protected areas and climate change impacts. I would like to extend my gratitude to Nathalie Hilmi, my supervisor, to Aldina Miel, to the whole the teacher staff from the MARRES program, to my classmates, the coordination team of MARRES, to David Cebeso, Marcela Smith, Stefano Malatesta, that helped me to try to reach the samples, to try to increase the sample size of this study. And out of the academic field, I would like to extend my gratitude to my family and to all those people that contribute to accomplish this goal. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you for your presentation. So we are now starting the 15 minutes questions with Jean-Vincent and then with Nina. Jean-Vincent.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. I have a question. Does developing long-term plans make sense given that the main threat of the Maldives in the short term is the rising sea levels? So therefore, the end of the country or the island?
Yeah, actually makes a lot of sense, but the problem is that the plans, for example, the main plan that they have now, it's from 2019, as I mentioned before, to 2023. So it's still being short. It's for 4 years. So that's I think that long-term plans can be really helpful as well. But for now, it doesn't exist that kind of plan. It was just for 4 years, the strategic action plan from 2019 to 2023.
Okay.
Okay, so Nina, and then we will go with Stefan.
Yes, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. It was great to hear all these different impacts that are affecting the perception of the Maldivian population. I was wondering, because you said that you didn't have enough, or your sample size was too small, how did you spread the survey? Who answered them? And how come that you didn't get more answers?
Yeah, actually, Aldin was helping me with through Kaikai. I mentioned in my acknowledgement to David Seveso, Marcela Smith, and Stefano Malatesta that they are from the University of Milano, and they have an island there. I mean, not an island, but they have like a faculty from the university there to develop studies. So they are working with the community, and they helped me to make contact with the University of Maldives. Actually, I reach NGOs, the University of Maldives, research centers, and a lot of them didn't reply. And actually I use, for example, like regular platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, but I also was using ResearchNet, and it was really hard like to reach the sample due to, as I mentioned, due to the lack of connectivity, and most of them as well like local, because my like target was local population. So many of locals, especially like the older ones, don't speak in English. So it's kind of hard like to develop a survey in Daibehi. So that's why one of my recommendations was to work with the local stakeholders and local entities like governmental ones. So in that way, it's kind of, I don't know if it's easier, but much better to improve the sample size. And also I have to say that, for example, I mentioned Stoyanov, that he did a study from climate change impacts and the migration from the communities. And he was developing this study with 6 more persons during 3 months in the Maldives, and he could reach 350 samples. So it has to be understood that it's kind of hard to implement this survey in that specific country.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering because, of course, that will also affect then the outcome depending on who is answering. And do I have time for another question?
Yes, go on. Aldin is not going to ask questions this time, so you can.
Okay, perfect. So with all that knowledge that you now have, what kind of adjustments would you do in the Maldives?
For example, one adjustment that probably now it's possible is to travel there, because now was not possible to travel to the country. And even if it was possible, due to the regulation of the government, it was just possible to move in 2 islands. So it still was complicated to get a representative sample. So probably one of my biggest recommendation, and it's to travel there to the country and apply the service in a face-to-face manner, because I'm pretty sure that will change.
I wasn't talking about the surveys, actually. I was talking about the whole overall approach
yeah,
now,
so
about the perception of the...
It's pretty important to consider the communities and local population to develop better approaches to more realistic policies and plans to improve and to tackle the climate change impacts. Because many of the local population can give you a really like deep vision. So, for example, I was talking with one teacher that I found on ResearchGate, I'm sorry, and she told me that, for example, she started telling me like a story, like before the ocean, I don't know, was like not so warm, and now you cannot go to the beach sometimes. So they have like a really interesting story that can help to the decision and policymakers to develop better and more realistic policies to tackle climate change impacts. So I think that the biggest thing is to include local communities.
Thank you, Matias. Thank you, India. So we can go ahead with Stéphane Roberti, and then it will be Florian.
Thank you, Matias, for your presentation. It was very nice and very clear. So your study is very outside my field of interest, in fact. So I will ask you a very basic question. And so I was wondering, what is finally the purpose behind conducting the kind of experiment of survey you did?
Basically, is to assess like the existing policies in the country, and I can come back, for example, to the first question, that policies are not really strong, and they are like short term. So maybe it was to assess the policies from the country. I mean, the general policies, of course, I was speaking in one part of the presentation, but also some strategies to mitigate the climate change impact in the country, in Maldives, because I was explaining as well, it's extremely vulnerable to these impacts. So, and also to measure the perception, to have an idea if it's important to count with the local communities, to develop better approaches, and to tackle this climate change impacts. As well, I have to say that, for example, there are, I didn't mention it now because it's short time, but there is like the World Bank and the Asian Bank and many other NGOs are providing funds to the Maldivian government to improve and enhance these policies and strategies.
Okay. So I don't have any other question. Thank you.
The octopus room is muted. Couldn't hear you.
Christophe, you're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, so I was talking to request yourself. Okay, so thank you, Stéphane. Nice. So Florian, Adrien. I thought we lost Florian, but actually you lost us. And after Florian, it's going to be Steve. Florian.
No, I'm here. Well, yeah, thank you for that presentation, Matias. Very interesting. And Maldives is not a bad place for diving and surfing. I know that Nina, she stole my question. So I was wondering what works the best. I mean, we're in 2021. So is it better to go like face to face with the people? Which social media works the best? So that's like my first question. You know, I'm no expert in that topic. So I'd like an answer to that after. But no, just a quick comment. I've been working on quite a few vulnerability studies, especially in the Indian Ocean. We had one in Madagascar, something going up in India, and in a bunch of, I know that there is a bunch of tenders for protecting those low-lying islands and you know, developing countries in low-lying islands, and okay, so we do usually like marine flooding modeling. We do like some erosion. We look at the vulnerability on the physical processes, but nowadays there is always a part which has to deal with the socioeconomic part. For example, how do you what value do you put to the loss of a mangrove? What value due to sea level rise, for example? What value do you put to the loss of whatever percentage or area of coral reef? So that's very, very interesting topic that you chose, and that's in the heart of what's happening nowadays, you know, in all the scientific / World Bank projects, you know, so some funding is there, so it's really like a great thematics. So what works best in terms of
decrease the vulnerability? For example, now in the current days, maybe this was maybe a half of month ago, that Maldivian government start to design like this kind of like a flotating city out of the Norman Island with with the shape of a pentagon. so like and interconnected between them. So the plan is to build that. I don't know how many time they're going to take, but I think it's a really good strategy, because the other studies that I was reading in the literature, they just talk about land reclamation, which is like to add, for example, like sand and things like that to decrease the sea level rise. But I think that in a country like Maldives, it's really complex due to the data that I gave before as well, that it's like the highest natural elevation is 2.4 meters above sea level. So I think that land reclamation, I don't know if it's really good. And actually, most of the studies talk about like the climate change refugees from Maldives. So basically, it's like the migration from the people. So I think that the new technologies that they are implementing, as I mentioned before, like this floating city, can be a good idea, but I don't know if it's gonna work. I don't know how many time it's gonna take. So if you want, I can send.
Plus the design of such structures is very tough to do, but it's sometimes easier to have like pies. No?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are the expert there, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Florian. So we are now going to Steve here, and we will finish with Eric.
Yeah, I have a question. Like on your slide, like you showed that one of the main concerns for people with climate change was the impact on fish stocks, right? Or no, how do they already feel climate change? And one of them was the impact on fish stock. Do you think there is an impact of climate change on fish stock? It's already there, we can already feel it, or is it actually more like, you know, that people hear so much stuff about climate change that even if there is like fish stocks are going down, that's actually, they say it's due to climate change, even if it's not due to climate change?
Yeah, I mean, what I think it's that, and what I could read is they are decreasing, like the fish stock is decreasing in the whole country. Some of the literature says that it's due to climate change, but some others says that it's for unsustainable methods. So, for example, in countries from the like east of the Indian Ocean or like southeast of Asia, they use dynamite, for example, for fish. So they destroy corals as well. So I think it can be a mix between both of them, like the not sustainable methodologies for by fisheries, and as well like the climate change as impact of climate change, because basically Maldives has a lot of corals, so climate change is impacting corals. So as I mentioned, it's kind of a wheel, so that is gonna as well like decrease biodiversity in some point. So I think it's a mix between those two things that I just said.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve. So we are going to conclude with you, Eric.
Thanks, Matthias. Hi. Thanks, Matthias. Very, very interesting presentation. I have actually one quick question on the same slide that Steve mentioned. You also showed that they are mentioning health problems. Do you have some more input into that information about what kind of health problems they had?
They repeat, for example, they were talking about health issues, but generally, and just 3 persons says that it was breathing problems.
Okay, thanks. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's very global. So having a limited amount of survey answers, and you explained the reason for it. How confident are you about the data that you got out of it, the interpretation? So my question behind it, would you publish it, for example, or would you put more efforts into going to one of these?
Yeah, definitely the second one. I would put more effort to develop a bigger sample size, so be representative and more realistic.
Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Maybe Aldin, so as you actively participated in this work, we are not going to ask you to ask a question, but maybe you want to do some remarks on this work?
Thanks for this beautiful work. So I think you sum up really nicely all your data, and you did a really huge amount of work from the literature to the survey and the case study. It was quite clear. My main question is, it's more about how can you imagine asking local people to be more active locally in these kind of topics?
Okay, so in my opinion, I think that it's through educational programs, first of all, and then with the help of NGOs. So for example, I contact probably like 20 NGOs or a little bit more. So they are involved like with kids, schools, and now they are implementing programs. I mean, the programs start to be implemented like 15 years ago, but what I found out as well is that they are not being effective and they are not being well received from population. So I think that everything has to start by the educational field, like and to try to generate a conscience about the amazing country that Maldives is, and the ocean and nature as well, and how important it is to take care of that. So I think that, in my opinion at least, is reinforce the educational programs. I think that...
Of course, I'm mute again at the end of the day. Thank you, Aldine, and thank you, Matias. We would just say that, Aldine, that it was not a question, of course. Okay, Matias, thanks a lot for your work. I really hope that you're going to be able also maybe to go directly there. It's always frustrating to work on a site when you're not able to go there. And also just to underline the fact that COVID was important for everyone in the last month. But especially for your work, because just to underline this again, we felt it also here. You wanted to go there because it was not possible for the people you wanted to fill this survey to fill them, because they had no access to internet, but it was not possible. And it was not possible for any other people also to go there and interact. So it's really interesting work you've done given these constraints.
Thank you very much, Christophe.
And so
good for participating.
Good luck for the following, Matias, there in Chile. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you very much.
Right. So we're going to continue here with Richard, who is here. Hello, Richard. You can go there. So, just to tell you that you're going to have the feedback here. So we just close that so you don't see the jury at the same time you present. This is very proper. So you will see the presentation here. It's going to be maybe 1 second delay compared to here. Just for you to know, you can use a remote. If it doesn't work, just the receiver is just behind you. For you to know. Okay. And after this, for the questions, you will be able to interact directly here. You don't have to look at the screen behind you.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
Just a few seconds, so I choose a good one. Here. Oh, where you want, really. Okay, work fine. Okay. Pour l'instant, la suite du programme. Yes, so should work now. Yes. So do you have a time with you? 15 minutes? Okay. So one more thing, can you just move a bit to your, here. Just need to select that so that the jury online can see it. And now you can, no, that's not a good one. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should be trying now with this thing, but not. Okay, this one is your PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, and as usual, I'm going to ask Aldine if Aldine, you can see the screen of
Yes,
Richard.
I can see it.
Okay, so chat here.
Sorry, I accidentally pressed. There you go.
Okay, good. Here we go. 15 minutes. Good luck.
Right. Hi, my name is Richard Singhroy, and I wish to present to you the research I have done over the past 6 months. My research mainly pertains with gleaning within the Indo-Pacific region and the characterization of the intertidal zone. In order to present this, I'll first go over the context behind my research and the data I used. I'll then go over my interview methods and results and the mapping methods and results. Finally, I'll conclude with my major findings and what I believe should come next. So throughout the world, fisheries are an extremely important source of food. This is especially true within the global south, where around 2 million Africans depend on fish as a regular source of protein. This is also true within the Indo-Pacific Ocean, where some communities depend on fisheries for 100% of their protein intake. The intertidal zone is especially important within the Indo-Pacific region, as it acts as a supporting ecosystem for many other fishery ecosystems. For example, mangroves and seagrass within the intertidal zone act as nurseries for reefs, which are quite heavily fished. The intertidal zone in it of itself also hosts its own fisheries, and the one we will be talking about today is gleaning. Gleaning is the act of going out into the intertidal zone and collecting organisms that are later used for either food, construction materials, jewelry, etc. These organisms can include sea urchins, sea cucumbers, seagrass, crabs, shells, etc. There's very little known about the dynamics of gleaning, even though we do know the broad strokes of it. There's also very little known about the effect of gleaning on the habitat. This is likely due to the fact that gleaning is not a major economic activity on a national scale, right? It's small communities that are taking part of this, just people going out and collecting for their livelihoods. So they're not studying these small fishery activities. And lastly, within the Indo-Pacific region itself, there's not very much information known, as it is such a diverse region and a large region. Why is it important to know this? Well, first of all, many of these communities may be isolated, and gleaning may be a major part of their food security, as they may not have conventional means of gathering either protein, food, or other sources of income. And I already talked about the importance of the intertidal zone. So it's important to know what the effect of gleaning is on such an intertidal zone to better protect other fisheries that may have an ecological link. Lastly, policymakers need more information. If they are to act on this activity and protect it, then they need more information to know which ecosystems they need to protect, to know which communities need to be supported, etc. So more knowledge is always better. In order to accomplish my survey or my research, I came up with 2 major objectives. First was to understand the gleaning habits. So we therefore asked, what are the gleaning habits within the Indo-Pacific intertidal zones? And second was to understand the intertidal zones themselves. So we therefore ask, to what degree can we map out the intertidal zones in the Indo-Pacific? In order to do so, I need data. I worked with the Indo-Pacific Seagrass Network, which collected information at all these green dots here. They did so throughout the past few years with the help of many researchers. Here, you'll see all the different yellow sites are where they currently have interview data. So those are the yellow sites that I will be using. I did not use the purple sites in my study. So the interview method. The interview method had 3 major goals. The first was to assess gleaning habits. The second was to assess the catch of gleaners. And the third was to quantify that catch. Quantifying the catch was done by weighing their catch. Assessing their catch was done by identifying the species that they caught And assessing the gleaning habits was simply done by asking them questions about what tools they use, why they glean, what ecosystems they prefer, what they do with their catch, etc. Gleaners were interviewed while they were still in the intertidal zone and had just finished their catch. The first major result is the reason behind gleaning. There's two things that stand out. As you can see in the green, food is a major reason for why people glean. And in blue, you can see that income is also a significant reason. There is two exceptions to this. One is in Maputo Bay, which is in the south of Mozambique, and the other one is in Kowloon, which is in the south of Tet. Here we can see that these two study sites tend to glean mostly for income. When asked what they prefer, where they prefer to glean in monetary terms, almost across the board, gleaners responded with seagrass ecosystems. This is likely due to the fact that seagrass ecosystems is highly productive and also hosts many herbivores and detrivores that are collected, especially sea urchins and sea cucumbers. Another one was sand. This is likely due to the fact that sand has many different crabs and shell species that like to burrow underneath the sand that are very useful for them. Once more, however, I do have an exception. With Bagamoyo off near Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, preferring mangrove habitats. And I'll actually talk about Bagamoyo in a later slide. So in order to better understand the relationship between the ecosystems and the gleaners, we also want to look at the catch per unit effort versus the proportion of time they spent on what they report is their favorite ecosystem or their most productive ecosystem, which is seagrass. So here we can see a slight positive correlation, which is significant. We may need more data to see if there's a better positive correlation. And we must keep in mind that tool use does vary across different sites. There is also the factor of ecosystem health that may change across sites as well and may make seagrass less or more productive in different areas. So maybe mapping will help us understand better the relationship between the ecosystems and the gleaning habits. So after lots of coding, here's my mapping method. First step was the collection of the field data. And this was done by the ISBN. And I managed to participate with this a few years ago when I worked with them in the past. Next step, I took all this data and sorted it, made sure all the coordinate systems matched up, made sure I could turn it into a shapefile that I could then use. I needed to have Sentinel imaging. So I took Sentinel satellite imaging as it's free on Google Earth Engine and created a masking layer, a cloud masking layer. This way with my maps, there'll be no clouds interfering with my classification, with my mapping. Next step, I took 70% of the field data and used it to train a random forest classification. This classification then identified where we would find seagrass, where we would find mangroves, etc. The next step was to create a land and ocean masking layer. This would reduce the interference and the error from the land and the deeper ocean. It also just makes the maps a little bit prettier, which is always nice. And lastly, we needed to verify our maps. So we did with the remaining 30% of the data, we did an accuracy assessment and finally exported the data. So what did we get? Here's a site that I mentioned earlier that really preferred mangroves over other sites to gleaning. And if we map the area out, then we start to see why. Here, the white dots are where gleaners were interviewed. And you can see that they're very close to a massive mangrove forest, right over here. So this likely explains why they prefer mangroves. There's a large abundance of it within the area. Now, normally mangroves are hard to access, but people in this area might have found a better way. We can see that our overall validation accuracy was about 75%. So 75% of these pixels normally are correctly classified. We must take into account that here, it was hard to find a good low tide picture. of this area. So you might see some misclassifications towards the north, where you may see mangroves where there are clearly no mangroves. This is an example of where the classification can go wrong. However, what we really care about is down here. And as all our training data was, all our field data was down here, it seems like the classification did a good job around the shore. We look at our second site, Njuku in Tanzania, off the coast of Zanzibar. We can see that we have a good result as well. Gleaners were interviewed in several different locations this time, and we can see as well the different densities of seagrass throughout in a rocky area to the south. This is typical of what you'll see within the intertidal zone, as wave energy tends to as they're coming in and out of the tide, tends to make ecosystems very sparse and mixed together. But we mostly have a domination of seagrass throughout. Again, we have an accuracy of 67% here, which is definitely usable based on the literature that I have read, which has had maps that range from 50% accuracy to maps that range to 90% accuracy. We could increase the accuracy with higher resolution mapping. For example, I did try using planet maps, which have a 3 by 3 meter pixel, or instead of sentinel maps, which have a 10 by 10 meter pixel. However, when using planet maps, we had a lower accuracy due to the lower spectral resolution. In other words, sentinel maps have a lot more different bands and can see different wavelengths compared to planet maps. So we must keep in mind when making these maps that spatial resolution is very important, but so is spectral resolution. But what can we get from these maps? Well, we can get percent cover. Now, many ecologists will be familiar with percent cover when they work with quadrats. We can do the exact same thing with an entire habitat, which is an extremely powerful tool. So keeping in mind the accuracy of the maps when you are looking at this at all times, but this gives us a good idea and a good way of comparing different ecosystems. And then if we compare the gleaning habits, then we can understand why the composition of some ecosystems may appear as they are. So let's conclude. First off, gleaning is an important activity. People depend on it for food and people depend on it for income. As I said, as I showed, around 46% of gleaners reported feeding themselves with gleaning, and around 27% reported using gleaning for income. Gleaners also tend to target seagrass habitats. This is likely due to their high productivity. Sand and mud habitats are also preferred. And finally, sentinel mapping is definitely a viable method of classifying and characterizing the intertidal zone. So what comes next? Well, first off, we need to make more maps. 2 sites is not enough to get an idea of the entire Indo-Pacific. And the mission of the Indo-Pacific Seagrass Network is ongoing. So this is really just a first step, and the first time that this data is really being used to map. So as a first step, I'm pretty happy, but it's not all that can be done. With more maps, we can get hopefully more catch per unit effort data from interviews, more percent cover, and then we can do different tests between those. And that is really the next step. So I looked at each data set individually, and the next step is to put them together. And that would be doing partial least square regression test, principal component test, correlation matrix. This way we can really identify a link between the seascape and the gleaning habits. And finally, this information is very useful, but not as useful as can be unless it is put in the hands of the community and policymakers. That is why throughout my research, I've used Google Earth Engine, which is a free software. I've used Sentinel Images, which is free images that you can get, so that anybody around the world can do this for their own local communities and then map out their own areas. I would like to thank, first off, the Indo-Pacific Seagrass Network, as they have been collecting data for years, and researchers and volunteers have been doing this on their own. And it's really a lot of work that they have put into this. I'd also like to thank MARRES team, as they helped me throughout this research, both academically and administratively. They definitely made my life easier. But a special thank you goes out to my supervisor, Linda Nuden, who's a specialist in seagrass ecosystems and social ecology. She was very patient with me, helped me a lot throughout this research. I couldn't have done it without her. I'd also like to thank Anders Knubbie, who's a specialist in coastal remote sensing, and who gave me many tips throughout my research. Here are my references. And thank you. Any questions?
Yes. Thank you, Richard. Thank you a lot. So for information, you've got a team of supporters in the Kraken room there. We're looking, watching you at the same time. And also Lina and Diane, that you may know, we're watching and saying good luck just before, and I'm sure they'll say congratulations now. So now we start the 15-minute questions. You start or end this time? You start, so you will end. Okay, so Aline, here's your time.
Hi. So thank you for this really nice talk. I have a question regarding this gleaning. So how far do you know how far from the local place people are going for gleaning, and how do you include this parameter into your mapping? Because yeah, so when you ask them why they are gleaning for, so did you ask them how far they are going also from their place?
So gleaners tend to go, we must remember that when they're gleaning, they're doing it during low tide. So they only have a few hours before the high tide comes back in. So they really cannot go that far, as they do not want to spend too much time walking, glean for only a little while, and too much time walking back. I can show you the graphs again if you like.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you can.
Oh.
Which one do you want?
Either one of the maps would work. I can show on either one.
A map?
Yeah.
A map of the world or a map of?
Sorry, the classification maps there. That one will work, yes. So actually, yeah. So here we can actually see the intertidal zone very well. And I tried looking at depth maps to help me identify the area in which there is only an intertidal zone. The thing is that the resolution for many depth maps is super massive. So if I try to use them, then this would be 1 pixel, for example, and that would tell me nothing. We did not directly ask the gleaners how far they go. We did ask them what type of ecosystems they go to and how long they spend gleaning. But for my mapping process, I really had to just outline the intertidal zone. And apart from that, as you see, I only use 1 or 2 kilometer scale, because again, the gleaners don't have time to walk more than just a few kilometers for their gleaning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dean. We can go to Eric now.
Hey, Richard. Thanks. Very, very interesting talk. I have 2 questions, but I probably can only ask one. But you showed on one slide also if it was just for food, if it was an additional income, it was a main income. And you showed us 2 sites, I forgot the names of them, where it was a main and an additional income. But if I correctly seen the other ones, you also have somewhere you have additional and main in addition. So I think this income aspect is quite present, not only on those 2 sides, but overall on the different sites. My question behind it is, do you know what the average income of those populations are? Is it linked to more poverty and that's why they need additional income, or is it independent?
So what I believe, so we did actually do, or the Indo-Pacific did actually do like a local survey. I did not look at it specifically within my research. So they looked at access to internet, access to education, and average income within the communities. So for me personally, that was a little bit outside the scope. I would have loved to include it, but it was a little bit too much work at that point within the time. If I had to say personally from when I visited the field, I believe that it is mostly an additional income, at least within Zanzibar where I was. They have a lot of tourism industries a lot of times within these areas. So they tend to probably use it to sell to tourists. I actually have another graph within the hidden slides afterwards.
Yeah, let's go.
Can
we stop?
Yeah. No, next one. So this is actually a graph that shows what they typically do with their catch. And here we can actually see that the major reasons are actually for home consumption, so for food, and also they sell at their local market. So this, I don't know, I think it shows more that they tend to sell again to tourists who come to the villages to see the nice beaches, or as well to other households within the community. So I think it is very localized economies that community-based economies.
Okay, perfect. I will remain with one question because I'm pretty sure my other one will be asked by somebody else in the audience. Thanks a lot, Richard.
Thank you, Eric, for that. We can go with Steve, and then we will with Florian.
Yeah, just maybe a more technical question. So how did you do your validation of overall accuracy? How did that work?
So I took 70% of the field data, and I used that to train my classifier. And then with the remaining 30%, after I had a classification, I asked my classifier, right, with these 30 points, it says at these locations that it's this ecosystem. How many of these points line up with the classification? And then so for each point to check like, okay, the field data says it's seagrass. Did I say it was seagrass? If it said yes, then it was validated. If not, then no. So about 30%, or sorry, 67% of the points for one map were validated. And in fact, these, if you can go, sorry, a little bit further down.
Yeah.
A little bit more. Here, so it's not very pretty because it's an extra slide, but here we actually have a matrix which each class, and it tells us what the amount of classes that were correctly identified. So 9 points of mangroves, for example, here were identified as mangroves, 2 were identified as sparse seagrass, and 5 points of mangroves were identified as land. So it does this for each class, and that's how we get an overall validation accuracy.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So now let's go to see Florian Brien, and we'll move with Stéphane after this. Florian.
Yes, thank you for that interesting presentation and the application of remote sensing. Actually, my main question was on the tools that you used. Is that like a commercial software?
So I ended up using Google Earth Engine, which is, it's up and coming. And it's starting to be used a lot for, especially because it's cloud-based computing, which is extremely powerful as a tool, as I can just type in a simple code and retrieve a bunch of satellite imagery from Sentinel, for example. I did also use a little bit of QGIS, which is also open software, but that was just to make the maps at the end.
Okay.
It does require, of course, knowledge of either Python or Java, but it is used quite often now in research, Google Earth Engine.
Okay, I didn't know that one. We used like ER Mapper like a few years ago. And I was wondering if you knew more about the algorithm that is used to classify, to make distinctions between the pixels. Do you know if it's a supervised classification or unsupervised?
Yeah, so my classification was supervised as I first gave it data to work with. I use a random forest classification because in the literature, it's very good, or it's shown to be very good at identifying between different types of vegetation. And as I'm working with different seagrass densities, mangroves, and algae, I thought that was valuable. Maximum likelihood classification would also be useful here, as it's, I guess, the more industry or research standard. It's the one that's used more often. And that one helps a lot if you have, for example, 5 points of mangroves and 20 points of seagrass. Random forest tends to amplify things that have more points, whereas maximum likelihood treats everything a little bit more equally. So that's the drawback.
Okay, great. Could you just tell me more about when I see like the validation overall accuracy of 0.75? I mean, did you, tricky question, is that your entire domain, for example, or did you just crop it to increase your accuracy value? You know what I mean?
So when I was actually doing the validation accuracy, I did the validation accuracy for this area only. The reason being is that all my data points were also within this area. And this area was, I believe, too far to actually be intertidal. So I didn't want the open, like the deeper ecosystems to mess up my classification. And I tried to limit it to what I could see as the intertidal zone, as that was my focus, to classify the intertidal zone and not the deeper areas. In Njuku, you can see it's actually only this area where I did the classification, even though I technically had a map for land and sea as well. And that's why I created this sea and land masking layer before doing the validation.
Okay, and why use using Sentinel imagery rather than USGS or other data, other satellite data? Any party is because it's free?
Yeah, can you go to the last slide?
Yes.
So the reason I actually ended up using Sentinel imagery is because it had a good pixel size for my use.
Last slide. The last slide of the
slides, sorry. It had a good size of 10 meters by 10 meters. Perfect. Okay. So I wanted to use free software or free imagery for that people within these developing countries and within the Indo-Pacific can do the same thing, right? So I want to establish a method there. So my options were then these three. So Planet, Sentinel-2, and Landsat 8. Landsat 8 was out of the question, as within my small areas of just a few kilometers, 30 by 30 meter resolution is just too low. I couldn't do anything.
It's too low. Okay, okay. Yeah. Okay. You need at least 10 by 10, right?
Yeah. And Planet, I could get for free. The problem there was that the spectral resolution was too low. So Sentinel has about like 11, 12 bands, I think. I have to look back at it. The Planet only has 4 bands, red, green, blue, and near red. So the spatial resolution was better, but it was giving me lower results because it didn't see each pixel with as much detail.
Okay, sweet. Well, great, great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Florian. So we will go to Stefan now.
Thank you, Richard, for your presentation. Very nice one and very interesting. My question is more related to the activity of gleaning. And I was just wondering if gleaning was very widespread among the local communities, or does it only concern a certain category of people, or this is...
Yeah, so gleaning is actually an extremely common activity. From what I've seen in both the literature and in my own research. It's actually also a very old activity because it's a very easy way of getting food, right? You don't need a lot of equipment or things like that. And the low tide gleaning area is very easy to access, right? You just walk out and you pick things up. So what I think makes it so widespread, even though it's a small, even though each gleaner individually has such a tiny impact, the reason that a lot of people do it is because it's so accessible. Anybody can go out and glean. If you're a farmer regularly and you have a bad crop, you can still go out and glean. Anybody can really do it. And so I think that's why it's important to study it, and that's why it's so widespread. I don't think large parts of the community do it, but from what I've seen in literature, each community that I have looked at tends to have gleaners.
Okay, and is the pressure caused by gleaning high or not on the intertidal ecosystems?
We really do not know. That's really the problem, is that it's such a small, it's not studied very often. And even within the literature, I looked, and many papers said people prefer to glean on seagrass, but we don't know what the impact is on seagrass. Are they tearing up seagrass? Personally, this is an estimate, so don't take this with fact. Personally, I would think that people who are gleaning for generations likely do not have a very large impact, as they know how to do it by now without impacting the ecosystem or without destroying the seagrass when they're looking in it. But that is just a personal opinion. That is not, we still need research to look at it yeah.
Okay, but I'm happy with that reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Stéphane. We will go with Nina Müller and conclude with Jean-Vincent at the end.
Yes, thank you. That was really interesting. I also never heard about gleaning before. So, and all my questions were asked. So actually, I don't have any. Just really great presentation. I think it's great that you are so well prepared and that you have really answers for everything. So I'm sorry I don't have a question for you, but yeah, great job. And I think we are almost out of time anyway. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nina. So I will guess that Jean-Vincent has 2 questions.
Yeah, first, can gleaning become a danger for biodiversity in this place? Like in France, for example, in Britannia, there is some danger about this activity. So,
it is definitely a possibility. For example, if there's a targeted species by gleaners, right? They go after sea cucumbers because people tend to like to eat sea cucumbers or sea urchins, or maybe if there's a lot of tourists in the area, then they tend to switch their gleaning over from maybe a diverse food subsistence gleaning to mostly going after shells and things that tourists will pay a lot for. So there's definitely a danger, I assume, with going after targeting specific species. But we also have to remember that gleaning happens within a small area, right? So one community gleans within a small area. So if there is an impact, it's likely very localized to where they're gleaning, and it doesn't stretch out very deep into the coast or very wide sometimes. But there is definitely a threat
and
back there.
So if it's become a threat, large threat, for example, if there was a regulation to do, what would you do?
So if gleaning would to become a threat, the first thing that would come first is consultation of the local peoples, right? The reason behind it becoming a threat would need to be known before anything else, because it's likely you could probably solve the problem by removing the reason why it's a threat, right? So if maybe people need more food, so they start gleaning more and more and more, and then that's when it becomes a threat. Removing gleaning is likely not the solution, as you still have a starving community. So therefore, maybe introducing other ways of getting food would be the best way to go about it. Making sure that we have a healthy and happy community is probably the best way for them to therefore look after their local ecosystem. Beyond that, then you can probably remove some maybe more impactful industries before going after gleaning, because remember, the intertidal zone may be affected by gleaning, but there's likely effect from coastal runoff pollution. There's likely effect from ocean temperature change, and you still have these global impacts. Yeah. Industrial fisheries that may affect coral reefs. Therefore, you have less nesting fish within the ecosystem of seagrass. It might be better to remove those industrial fisheries first and go after gleaning. Barring that, then I would start to regulate gleaning itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So, Tim, it's the end of your session, but also of the day. So good luck. You have some congratulations here also on the YouTube live, but I will let you have a look to that. Good luck for the followings. Thank you a lot for the members of the jury. Thank you again. Aldine Amiel, Eric Rottinger, Steve Como, Florian Bréhin, Stéphane Roberti, Nina Muller, et Jean-Vincent Grassa. Some of you will come back tomorrow. For the third session, we will talk tomorrow with Soline, Manon, Falco, Marine, and Sabrina. We will talk about education and also about science and communication more in general. So we will come back on YouTube Live at 1:30 with Soline. See you tomorrow.